Hello friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time, and I'm here today to answer some of the most common canning questions that I get. I was going to limit this to 5, but I thought of one more just before I started this video. So I'm going to start with that one, the one I just thought of, because I'll probably forget it since it's not on my list. And that is, how long does canned food last? The thing that we first have to get past is when it comes to any kind of expiration date, and you have to understand what those are about. In fact, I did a video just on that topic that I'll go ahead and link to down below, because I'm not going to cover everything in here. But generally speaking, when it comes to canned foods, as long as your seals stay intact, they're not going to go bad. It'll be indefinite. What you will lose in time, and that time frame will depend on how you have it stored, is the nutrients and the quality. Now, not all the nutrients. Certain nutrients will always be there. You will always have your proteins, your carbohydrates, and your minerals. Those don't just disappear. Unlike a lot of your vitamins that are a little less stable. And exposure to heat and light will kill those, but you got to consider, if you can stuff, they were already exposed to heat. So any nutrients that are going to be lost in heat exposure will have already been gone by that point. And then light exposure can also degrade the quality over time. That doesn't mean, though, that after a year or 2 years or 5 or 10 or 25, that it's spoiled. Some people think that, oh, if there's an expiration date, that means when you hit that expiration date, you can't eat that food anymore. It's bad, it's spoiled. Well, not necessarily. It's going to depend on how it's stored, if it stays sealed, and so on. So I have, for example, here I brought out some beef that I canned up in August of 2015. So it's over 7 years old now. What you're seeing there is there's fat floating on top. The color is actually still really good. It's all still good. I'm not at all afraid of eating this 7-year-old meat. And then here is some salsa I canned in 2016. Everything is sealed. There's no signs of spoilage. And I totally trust both of these right here. So those are just a couple of examples of things that I've canned. So yes, it should last indefinitely if you store it properly. So generally we're speaking, 70 degrees or lower when you're talking about a cool place, but you don't want it to be freezing either, because that can cause your jars to burst or lose their seals. And also just trying to keep them as dark as possible. So making sure, like in our pantry room, we have curtains over the windows. We try to keep it as dark in there as possible to limit light exposure. Now let's go on to the next question. The first one that was actually on my list is, where do I get my lids and what lids do I use? Well, here's the 3 lids I'm using right now. Now, the only reason I have these ones, this is 4 jars, and this is Superb, is because both of these companies, this was unsolicited, each sent me a box of each size, the wide and the regular mouth, these are regular mouth, of their lids so I could try them out. I didn't ask, I never agreed to anything, they just showed up in my post office box. So I thought, well, why not give them a try? Now, these are both excellent lids. I've had no issues with either of them. I've been using them all summer long through my canning and trying to use them equally so I can compare them. I've had no issues with either of the 4 jars of the Superb brand lids causing any damage to my jars or not sealing or coming unsealed. They've been working great for me. Now, what I do think people should know, because a lot of people don't know this, is because a lot of people are getting these 4 jars lids for the same reason I got them and then promoting them. And what some people don't even realize is these are actually made in China. Now, the company that founded this is all US based, which is nice, but currently the lids are being made in China. But these are definitely good lids compared to some of the cheapo brands that come from China. Now, what I heard through the grapevine is that 4 jars is trying to get a factory here in the United States to make the lids. So I'm sure it's because they're just getting off the ground, and having them made in China is going to be a lot less expensive for them until they can get a factory here. So I personally won't buy any of the lids until that happens, but they are definitely good lids. Now, Ball and Kerr have always been were longtime favorite lids, but I'm not sure what's going on with them anymore. I'm not sure if they're still made in the United States. And sometimes I know people are having a hard time getting a hold of these. If you're looking at metal lids, having another brand to work with is a really good option. And I've been happy with Superb. I know some people say they've had problems. I have had none. They're a nice thick lid. I actually did weigh them in comparison to both the 4 jars, the Kerr, and the Ball, and each one in both sizes weighed more, which not only does it feel thicker, that tells me there's actually more material here. The only drawback I found is that when you go to open these, you're more likely to bend the lid. So you got to be a little more careful. And I don't know if that's because it does make a really good seal. And this part here, the little gummy part here, is thicker than any of the other brands. You just have to move a little slower and be more careful with it if you're planning on reusing those lids, especially for canning. And yes, you can reuse the metal lids, any of them, for canning, as long as they're in good condition and not bent up and don't have anything built up in the gummy part. That's got to all be nice and clean. And even if not for canning, you can, if you don't feel comfortable doing that, I reuse mine all the time for vacuum sealing dried goods into jars. And then the other lid that I started buying years ago were the Tatler lids. And this one actually I can tell is one of the oldest ones. You can tell because it was one I used to either can salsa or tomatoes with. And the Tatler reusable lids are great. They're also made here in America. And there's also the Harvest Guard brand. I haven't tried them. I'm personally not interested. I'm going to stick with Tatler. They were the original. And these come with the rubber ring. And so it's a 2-part sealing system. You can usually get the best price on these. If you're not finding a bunch of used ones somewhere, if you're buying them new, the best price that I have seen is actually from the company reusableLids.com. or reusablecanninglids.com. I'll put the link in the description box down below, especially if you're buying in bulk. That's where I've seen the best deal on them. So there is a difference in the way they work though, and I want to point this out real quick. I have a video specifically on how to use the Tatler lids, because the way you tighten the bands is very different than how you do it with metal bands. With metal bands, we tend to put it on pretty tight with our hands like this. You don't want to crank it really, really tight, but you want it very snug on there. These bands here, because I know you're going to see these on there. I have a video on why some of my jars I keep the bands on, but I keep them on loose. As you can see, I had to tighten this one down just to show you. So I'll link to that video. You can check out why I leave the bands on some. Anyway, with the Tatler lids, don't hold the jar with the other hand. You just put the bands on until the jar moves freely. And that's just, you don't want it any tighter than that. Because if you get the band on there too tight with a Tatler lid or a Harvest Guard type lid, then the jars will explode in the canner, or even as you're trying to get the products out of your canner. And I had that happen to me a couple of years ago. I was canning some tomatoes and most of the jars ended up blowing up, and I thought they were done. I went to reach in and get another jar out and it blew up on me, and I burnt my wrist pretty good. I got a blister on it, as you can see in this image right here. So it is important to understand the difference. Metal lids, yes, you put that band on nice and tight. With the Tatler lids, you don't put them on that tight, just enough that the jar turns. So that is very important to understand that, if you don't want your jars exploding. So then the next question that goes really right along with that is, where do you get your jars? Well, I've always used mostly Ball jars, because even though they're made by the Ball and Kerr, made by the same company, I can usually get Ball jars for cheaper here. And I used to buy them in our local stores where I got most of them. But in the past several years, we've been able to obtain a lot more jars without having to buy new ones, just from friends and family or garage sales. So a lot of them we got for free, including the lady down the road a couple years ago who just set a couple of boxes of jars out and put free on there. I grabbed them and off I went. And then last year, I think it was, Patrick had found something on Facebook Market. It was in another town a few hours away. So he went, it was a big item, some kind of tank. He went to pick that up, and it was an estate sale. and they had just a ton of jars they were just giving away. We took them all. So we have far more jars now than we'll probably ever use, but at least we have them. That's mostly where I get my jars. And before that, it was, you know, constantly looking, you know, if I ever saw them at garage sales for a decent price, I'd grab them up, because jars can break. Even though jars can last forever, if you're not careful, you can break your jars. And sometimes we're always finding more things to use jars for. Like back here, well, it's kind of covered up by my jug of wine I got brewing back there and my little autumn arrangement, but I've got a lot of my herbs right there that I use specifically for teas. And then I have all my spices and herbs that I keep in the kitchen for regular use. Those are all stored in jars. And then everything else that I dehydrate and put up, that's all stored in jars as well. So I use a lot of jars. I even freeze in jars. And I have a video just on how to freeze in jars. So being able to get these things from garage sales and yard sales and estate sales, and even on Facebook Market, Craigslist, or anything like that where you can find stuff secondhand, jars are great. In fact, when it comes to ball and curd jars now, I recommend going with secondhand jars, because they're probably going to be the ones that are still better made, because some of the newer jars coming out are not made as well as they used to be. So I heard recently that they have been bought out by somebody, I don't know who, and right now I don't really care personally, because I have all the jars I need. And as far as lids go, if I am going to buy any more lids, the Tatler, I don't need any more Tatler lids, but if I decide I need any more metal lids, I'm going to go with the Superb brand. And you can get those through Lehman's. You can also get them on Amazon. I'll link to that down below. But anyway, yeah, you can buy those. They are more expensive, but at least they are made in the US, and to me, they seem like a better made lid. So again, the jars, I recommend looking secondhand. Just keep looking. And remember, you can recycle a lot of product jars, especially if you don't feel comfortable canning in it. Like some people will recycle the whole jar because that's what they can do. I know the UK people do that a lot because they can't get the same kind of product we can here in the United States without having to pay an arm and a leg for it. So they recycle and can in jars that maybe they'd buy spaghetti sauce in or something else in. As long as it's got a lid that will seal under pressure and it's a good glass jar, it will seal. Remember, it was used to can in the first place, so it should be able to handle it. Pickle jars and so on. And back when mayonnaise jars used to be made out of glass, people used to can in those, and I have before too, and never had any issues with it. Now, one question I just got in, and I've got this one before, is on my mayonnaise making video, which I'll link to down below. People ask if you can you can mayonnaise? Well, some people would say, no, you can't because of the type of ingredients that are in there. Well, that's not the issue for me when canning mayonnaise, because I don't see any problem with canning dairy. I know some people are totally against it. People have been doing it for a very long time, canning dairy. And I have a friend that does it. I know a lot of people that do it and no issues. That's not what I'm concerned about, is the eggs. There's no dairy in mayonnaise, but there's eggs. So I'm just using that as an example. People say, don't can this, don't can that. But the problem with canning mayonnaise, if you can mayonnaise, once you've made your mayonnaise up, if you heat it, it's going to basically turn to liquid, and you're going to lose all that thickness that you got. It's not going to be good. So canning it would be silly. And for how quick and easy it is to make mayonnaise, it would be silly to actually can it. It's better to keep the ingredients on hand, the oils and the eggs that you need. Like for me, I find freezing eggs in twos works best for mayonnaise making. I don't know why the frozen eggs seem to work better, but I find that they work better than fresh eggs. But either one will work. If you have chickens, it's during time of the year that your chickens are laying, you can make your mayonnaise out of that and then freeze some of your extra for making mayonnaise through the winter when your chickens are not laying. And then if you're buying store-bought eggs, yeah, there's that, but I still think you got to find ways to put food up. So if you're buying eggs, like the video I did not too long ago about why you need to put up extra eggs in storage, whether it be freezing or dehydrating or using the water glass / lime water method, these are all excellent ways to put eggs up. If you have eggs in storage, you don't have to worry about canning mayonnaise, because you already have, the two main ingredients are the oil and the eggs. and then whatever spices you're adding to it. And what I found, by the way, is with mayonnaise is it can keep for a long time in the refrigerator, and I believe it's because of the vinegar that you add to it and the coconut oil that I use in mine, because I use half coconut oil, half avocado oil, and I think that helps preserve it for a longer period of time in the fridge. So no need to can it. Just don't make up massive batches that you have to worry about spoiling. Another question I get quite a bit of, enough so that I think it was 2 years ago I did a video just on this, what I use to can with, what's my heat source. Because people see I have a glass top range back here, and no, I don't. I used to can on this as far as water bath canning goes, but when I got my big huge canner, I was nervous about the weight of that going onto here. And so I started doing my pressure canning outside. There's been rare occasions using the propane that we brought that inside and had to can out here in the hall, putting a protective layer on the floor and keeping the door open for ventilation. Because I ended up having to can during the rainy season, which is right now. We finally just entered our rainy season, late in the year, but yeah, so I don't can outside like that when it's raining. So yeah, it was back when the turkey fryer was the big thing, and we fell for it, and we bought it and did one turkey, and that was it. But that thing's been great. I use the pot for many other things, and then but the propane burner, that's what I've used for canning ever since. It's been great. Yeah, I do my water bath canning out there too. I just don't even bother doing that in here. Do it all outside because summertime it's too hot. Anyway, a lot of times to can inside, you don't want that heat going on in here. And then the last question, I'd say this for last for a reason, is people are constantly asking, can you water bath low acid food? Your vegetables and your meats would all fall into that. And what a lot of people will tell you is no, you can't. You can only pressure can. Now, I only pressure can those things because we did get a pressure canner, which was very expensive, and I am still very, very glad I have it. And I will always use that for any low acid food. And the main reason why now is because it shortens the time by half. Because most of your low acid foods are gonna, if you're going to water bath can them, you have to go 3 hours, sometimes 4, 5, and even 6 hours boiling them. And that's got to be a rolling boil, and it's got to keep boiling that whole time. But yes, you can water bath can. You can do it. There are charts out there that I had to look hard to find them, but I even recently found another one too, and I can't remember what site it was from, and I put them in one place so people could easily find them and then download those and have them for their own reference. 2 of them for certain are vintage. They're very vintage. One of them was put out by Ball. And so it shows you how it gives you the times for both water bath canning and pressure canning meats and vegetables, as well as fruits and so on. And so I'll put the link to that post down below where you can go in there and find those. But generally speaking, no matter what it is, you're looking at a minimum of 3 hours, and it doesn't matter if it's a quart or a pint of boiling when it comes to your low acid foods. And just remember, the United States is the only place that pushes this pressure canning low acid foods. Any other country in the world that cans, they water bath can everything. And there's obviously, we have the Amish, they still water bath can everything. As long as you do it properly, there shouldn't be any problem. It was the common method that was used before pressure canners became commonplace. And then eventually, the FDA and the USDA started changing their standards of how you should preserve your foods. And personally, I think a lot of that is to either A, make more money for certain companies, or B, make food preservation more scary or harder to do or more expensive to do so people won't do it. But that's a hypothesis. It could just be crazy thinking. So anyway, that was the last question, and take it or leave it. If you do not feel comfortable because of all the pressure people are getting about pressure canning, no pun intended, on the low acid foods, if you feel safer and more comfortable with the pressure canning, then go ahead and do the investment. I do recommend the All-American canner, but it is far more expensive than other types of canners you can get. And canners are one of those things that you can often find at garage sales, just like the 2 All-Americans, smaller ones that I found a couple of years ago, and I bought them just to have them. I gave one to my daughter-in-law, kept one for myself because it's nice and small. So if I don't want to fill up my big, huge canner I just have a few things to can. That small one is perfect. So that was great this year, having both the big and the smaller canner. And yeah, I mean, you could just like with the jars, look secondhand. Oftentimes you can find canning supplies, even water bath canners. I found it several years back, a water bath canner with a rack and everything. It was brand new, never used, $5. So just keep looking. You can find this stuff. People often get wild hairs thinking they're going to get into food storage and food preservation and storage, and then they just never follow through, either because the FDA, the USDA, and other people have totally scared them away from pressure canning or just canning period, that they just never bother, and then they turn around and sell this stuff for really cheap. Just keep looking secondhand. If you don't have the supplies yet, it's very likely you will find what you need if you just keep looking. And that also goes for dehydrators and so on. I have found 3 different dehydrators at garage sales and seen many more than that. Most of them look brand new. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and that it did answer those questions. And if you have any more questions or thoughts on anything I shared here, then go ahead and put those in comments down below, and I'll try to answer those, or maybe somebody else in the community can answer if I don't see your question or just don't have time. And thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.